Hello and welcome to the Joseki Masters channel. Now, instead of playing a game, we're actually going to study corner point for Josekis. I'm going to explain why I like to play certain kinds of Josekis in certain ways, and ways that you should actually answer corner point for Josekis. I'm going to set up the board like this initially right now, and we're going to use white approaching this black corner. Now, there's generally two ways for white to approach 4-4. You can either approach on the knight's move, or you can approach on the 3-3 invasion, and we are going to look at both, but we're going to start with the knight's move. Now, once he approaches on the knight's move, there's several things you can do. You can low pincer, you can high pincer, or you can basically do knight's move or jump. Now, if this cornerstone over here was black, I would definitely do one of the pincers, because that gives me a lot of potential to develop over here. But since this stone is actually white, I don't want to give up the corner, or at least I want to keep some of the corner. So I would either do either jump or knight's move. Now in this particular setup, I would rather do a knight's move, because if you jump, he has the possibility of this move, A, which you would have to connect, and that gives him a little bit of influence out here. Or later on, he has the possibility of a move like this, which is sometimes hard to deal with. But if you just do the knight's move, neither of those things are possible, and he either has to fly down here, in which this would be a pretty even trade. This is a classic Joseki, or white could actually attach here, and the correct play for black here is to actually Atari connect, and then you can probably just move somewhere else, somewhere else on the board. That Joseki is definitely done. So that's one. These are like the outcomes. You don't essentially do this or protect the stone. This stone right here in the beginning is way too small. If white Atari's here, I would just ignore him still. And if he takes it, I would probably just like go somewhere out here. And that would give me 2 free moves in exchange for taking these corner points, which is not big enough, definitely. So at this point, black would probably just play somewhere out here or some other big move. So that is a decent Joseki. It's pretty equal, honestly. Or white could take the easier, less confrontational move and go down here. Now, in this particular situation, I like it slightly more for white. It's not game-breaking or anything. It might not even be any kind of real advantage, but white does have more potential because of linking up with this stone, whereas this stone over here does limit black's potential on this side. So for this particular variation, because of the stone placement, I would actually like black's position. However, if there was a black stone here, or a black stone here, then I would guess it would be about equal. The thing is, I personally like expanding in the beginning towards my own stones to build up that Moyo territory influence rather than being limited by someone else's stones. On the other hand, if there is a stone right here, you do kind of break his potential for a big Moyo or territory, so it's really kind of what you prefer. So that is one of the knight's approach to the 4-4. And like I said, you could play here, and he does this, and you do this, and for white, he wants to link up with this stone. For black, you would probably just play here or play here now. But if this stone was black, then you might play somewhere else to build up your territory. Even if this black stone was here, I might play the jump, because that links up maybe a little bit better with this stone. But if there was, let's say, if there was actually a stone here, for instance, this low jump would be better. But however, if there was a stone here, then instead of playing the knight's move, then let's say if there was before this was played, there's a stone here, for instance, then when he plays this move, you'll want to jump. You kind of want the lower higher pairing, because that gives the shape looks better, and it gives you more potential than the low pairing. I think this shape just looks a lot better, and really if you jump this now, you have a very, very nice shape and a lot of potential for territory or points. Much more than if you had a knight's move down here. You got to pay attention to the shape. The shape is very, very important. Also, there is future potential for something like this if you want to build up your Moyo. So that's one way to actually play the knight's move. And there's, like I said, there's 2 variations of this. You either play it peacefully like this, or you either play it peacefully like this, or you take the more aggressive route you take the more aggressive route and you play it like this. Now, whether you do this or not really depends on the situation. If I were black, I would probably just play elsewhere at this point, like I said. However, there is also another approach that black can take. He can do this. Now, the right move for this is, there's several variations. There's kind of like this variation, which is pretty good. I mean, white gets something over here, black gets a little bit of corner space over here. Or like, more common, white can actually do something like this and then just do something like this. When white does this, you don't extend back and let him like keep doing this. You essentially just do this. Because realistically, if he charges, you don't have to block. You can block in this situation, but if he has more potential, if he has more stones over here, you can just like let him have the 2 stones. The 2 stones aren't really all that important. They're not that big. You're not really threatening his group. And if he does this, you might just want to go elsewhere as well. You get a free move, and these 2 stones, because these stones aren't really that threatened, these two stones aren't really that big. So when he pushes, you do not have to block here. And in fact, like, in other variations where there's already a white stone down here, like if there's a white stone right here, you would definitely just retreat and cut off the white stone. So technically, like, if he charges and then he does this, you just play elsewhere. If he wants to take another move to actually kill the 2 stones, great, you get another free move and you would actually get an advantage. So that's kind of where that actually leads. So essentially, like, it is something like this or like something like this. And that's pretty even on both sides, because black does get the sente, white does get this space, but black gets this corner space. So that's kind of like that variation. I know a lot of people for black, they like to play this. This is not a great variation. Letting white get the hane and then having white do this is not a great variation. If you do this, white can just extend here, and then, like, if you extend out, white can just kind of like play down here or something. And it's not, white can just play down here or something. You kind of have to protect this, and then white can do something like this. And this is actually much, much better. Well, not much, much better, but this is actually better for white. So that's actually like how you would play this. And then, of course, like a lot of times black would just play this, and white can connect up here, and then black would play somewhere else. Or white can just play over here. Because if black cuts, you can just retreat and take this territory. Yes, there is some influence out here, but getting a couple of free moves off of black, like capturing this, is well worth it for white. So that's another Joseki. Generally not, unless you're really, really trying to protect the corner. This particular Joseki does not actually favor black all that much, because white still, after all of this, white still actually has this move. And if black goes down here, white's going to ignore him. And if black cuts, well, then it's another gote for white. It's another gote for black, and these 2 stones aren't worth that much, and you're just going to get much more out of an extra move. So that's really not a recommended play for black. White does come out a little bit ahead if you do this kind of, either if he connects here or if he does this. White does come out like a little bit ahead in this particular Joseki. So definitely, like, you can play this, and it's not too bad. I think you lose a little bit, but not all that much if you play that Joseki. This particular Joseki is going to be a little bit more favorable for black, because you have this all stopped. You already have all the corner territory. He gets a little bit of this, and you have sente, which is very, very important in the beginning of the game. Obviously, if black stone is over here, like this kind of Joseki is going to be a lot more. This kind of Joseki is going to be a lot more favorable for black, because this stone over here would limit white's expansion. This stone over here, I don't feel like is quite as important for black, because you already have all the corner territory. And if you have a stone over here, great. But if you don't, I mean, this is just fine as well. So essentially, if a black has a stone over here, white doesn't really want this particular Joseki. White can also opt to go under and do this, or actually, yeah, go under and do this, or go under and connect one of these, and then you get this. Actually, black would just do this, but I mean, white can also opt to go under it is not like my favorite type of move. This is definitely not my favorite type of move here, because you do have to connect one of these. You probably would connect this one, and then when black takes it, I mean, you would either just play this or play elsewhere. Not really my favorite type of Joseki here, so I generally don't play this. Because I do think it's pretty I do think, you know, you can't really extend because he has these cuts down here. But I personally do not like this Joseki very much because it allows him to still cut the corner, and you still have more weaknesses here. White doesn't really get any territory. I'm not a huge fan of that one. You could also just get the corner and kind of just play it that way. I actually prefer this for black, especially like this. I think the influence outweighs the points here, but I actually have seen people do this. One situation where you would do this is if this side has already been developed and there's also development over here, so the influence doesn't mean quite as much, then you get the corner and he doesn't get that many solid points over here. So if this side is already developed and this side's already kind of developed, that is one Joseki that you could possibly do if black allows you. But during the beginning of the game, I definitely do not favor this particular Joseki. I think this is actually quite a bit better for black in my opinion. So that is kind of like the corner invasion, the knight's invasion. There is another variation, which is a lot of people play, and the correct play here is either here or here, depending on how these stones are actually situated over here. In this particular sequence, with white over here, you would want to play here. It's a little safer, and I think it secures your territory a little better. Plus, if you do this, there's always the chance of this particular invasion. So I do think overall the knight's move is better than the jump, and then white goes here. Everyone knows this. Now, I see a lot of Caillou players actually doing this. This is actually not a great move, because white can actually do this, and if you do this, you're kind of like giving him double influence on the outside. You can do this, but you know, then there's a bunch of problems in here as well. So, you know, just by him doing this, I think like you are basically taking the worst of the trade. And also, like, you know, with this move, later on, there's always this problem. And if you essentially like fix this problem and allow him to actually connect, now your stone's pretty weak over here. He has influence over here, and there's not too many points in the corner. He has you completely surrounded. So this particular outcome, I think, is definitely better for white. So you don't really want to do something like this. And if you want to come out, I mean, there's a lot of things he can do. He can also just come out, and then now you're threatened on this side as well. And your corner obviously is like very sketchy if he does something in the future like this. So a lot of weaknesses for black if you do this move. And also, he doesn't actually have to do that. White can just do something like this. And this is a variation I actually play out a lot in my games. White disconnects. You know, like, you can actually come out here this way. But I don't really know about this. Like, I don't know about, like, giving up just this stone. You can actually come out this way. But I'm just not really sure, like, how good... I'm really not sure how good this is for you know, black. This is not solid. You have to spend an extra move. White already has this over here. And, you know, there's always like these kind of forcing moves later in the game. So I personally don't really like that. And if you just play the variation that I see played all the time, I mean, I wouldn't do that, but I mean, like, if you just play this variation that I see played all the time, then I actually like the outcome. Sorry, this is the way it would work, actually. Sorry, this is the way it would. You disconnect, he Ataris, you extend down. He extends down, you do this, and then essentially you do this. Now, I checked this Joseki on Katago. This is actually even, but I personally prefer this for white because it's very easy for me to make use of this, the influence, plus your stone is now cut off. However, there is still this weakness in this peep over here, so white's influence isn't completely whole, and there are a couple of problems. But overall, like, the higher you go up in rank, the more you appreciate influence. The corner isn't overly big. It's maybe like 12, 13 points. And to me, like the influence that white gains is actually more than worth it. But like I said, there is this peep move here, so it's not absolutely complete. But I actually prefer white in this situation over black. However, on Katago, it is about equal, so it really depends on your style of play. There is another variation in the lower Caillou range that I actually see people play all the time. And it's actually this one. And you know, like this particular variation, black does actually win this fight, believe it or not, by doing this. Now, when black does this, white, the correct move for white is to do this and then to Atari. Black, like I said, does actually win this fight. But notice that it's Sente for white. Black's stone gets completely cut off. And there's still this cut vulnerability. There's still this cut vulnerability in Black's shape later. Of course, Black's not in any trouble of dying because he's got these 4 stones. But this is really 10 points in the corner. And you have this cut vulnerability, whereas, like, you know, there's a lot of forcing moves maybe in the future. So this is definitely significantly better for white because white does get the Sente. White's essentially just alive down here, and black is actually cut off. White can play like attacking moves like this one. So this is actually worse than the last Joseki for black. And this isn't really even a Joseki for black. This is just kind of like white winning essentially. Particularly on this particular Joseki. So this one favors white by quite a lot. So you don't really want to play this as black. Now, of course, a lot of like Caillou players or even low dam players I play against, they don't really see this move, so they end up just like letting me kill their corner, which means it's game over because this is basically this kind of advantage in the beginning is essentially game breaking for white, obviously. But if you do actually cut at this point. You do win the Liberty battle by 1. You do actually win the Liberty battle by 1. And, yeah, and essentially, you know, you would just leave it here and play something else because this cuts a huge vulnerability now. You can't really, as black, you can't really afford to do this anymore. You have to actually cut. I can actually force. And then if I have the ladder here, great. If I don't, I can just do this. And now your 2 stones are pretty weak. And as you can see, you only got really 9 points in the corner. In exchange for that 9 points, you lost a lot of the outside. So that would definitely favor white. And that's why generally, as you go higher and higher in rank, you hardly ever see anyone play this pincer move. Because there's just a lot of counters to this pincer move, either here or here. So yeah, it's just not played very often, and the correct move is actually here, and then white plays here, and that's a pretty even exchange. So I'm going to now show you the 3-3 invasion move. So 3-3 invasion, the way I actually answer is going to be very different based on what the position of my stones are. Here it doesn't really matter because there's a white stone in either position. Obviously, on the 3-3 invasion, in this case, you would actually go here, he would go here, and then maybe do this, and then black would just play somewhere else. If he does this, you can either connect, or you can continue to play somewhere else, depending on how big you think this is. And then, like, when he does this, you can just always do this or something. Yeah, it's a lot of influence over here, and it's pretty big, and it looks really bad, but you got 2 free moves, so, you know, that's kind of a trade-off. Or, like, you know, if you really want this, you can actually connect, and then just play out this. But, like, at this point, like, you would not answer as... when white hanes, you wouldn't answer, you just play somewhere else. So that's like one very, very simple variation. And this is one I see a lot of higher ranked players actually play at this point, because this is actually a fairly even trade at this point. However, like I said, if for instance, say I do this, if for instance it's this kind of shape, and then you play this, I'm definitely going to block on this side to solidify my shape. And then when white does this, I'm going to double hane. Because here, you get this point, but the thing is, like, I get this corner and I have a lot of potential to develop over here. This definitely builds like right into my moyo, And that's really, really good. If you do this, I might just go ahead and do something like this. So like this builds right into my side, and I can potentially make a lot of points here. So to me, this is actually good for black. However, if a white stone was here, like my development on this side is quite limited, and I'm not going to actually want to do this. But this isn't too bad for white either, because white can do something like this, and now he has a lot of potential on this side. However, I do actually see a lot of players making this invasion, even if this side is fairly developed with something like this. And then like they're like, oh, I don't know, and then like they see this kind of thing, and they're like, oh no, they see this kind of thing, and they're like, oh, this is getting really big. I'm gonna do the 3/3 invasion. It's still not a bad move, but however, like now this kind of Joseki does not actually favor white, in my opinion, because you have to do that, and then when you take, and I take this, you have very, very limited development over here, whereas my potential over here is really, really large. So to me, this is actually better for white. And if you do this, to solidify your shape, I'm essentially just going to ignore you and like go over here to make more territory for myself. So that's how it kind of is like with this. It really depends on the position of your stones. Like I said, if this side's already kind of developed over here, then the correct move is obviously to double Hane, because if he does this and you connect, and he does this and you connect, you get both sides and a lot of influence, and obviously this is going to be better for black because this corner is not big enough. But the thing is, like, if he does the original move and does this, then you pretty much you have potential on this entire side. And his group, while it's fairly settled, it's not completely alive yet, and there can still be some weaknesses if your thickness develops too hard over here. So that's kind of like how that plays out. The other thing about the 3/3 invasion is that you don't really want to. You can also block this way, but I just don't think this is as good for black. I mean, it's still not bad. You still get that, but white's development is not quite as limited over here, and I don't think this Moyo is quite as good as this Moyo. So it really depends on. You have to, like as a lower ranked player, to improve your game, you have to really when you do a Joseki, you do have to take notice of where the other stones are on the board, and kind of like you have to make them mesh together well. Now for like lower DDK players, like they make a lot of game breaking moves and mistakes each game, so this might not determine the game. But as you move up in rank, this becomes like small advantages get more and more important, and eventually, just by playing like moves that pair better with each other, rather than just looking at moves individually, you can get like 10, 15 point advantages, which puts your opponent in quite a bind. So that's kind of like how these corner Josekis work out. There's a couple more variations that there's one or two more variations that I want to explore for this, and these are the pincer moves. Like I said, if there's already stones over here, like either the low pincer or the high pincer would actually work for me. Obviously, if he does this, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, because like this gives me a lot of potential over here, and that's well worth giving up the corner for. And also, like, even on here, you can just force one more and do this if you want even more potential over here. And if you don't, if he comes up, you can kind of ignore him. But if he does this, like in the future, you do have this potential move, which if ignored, you can actually attach down here. And that builds up your potential a lot more, because that move does actually have to be answered. So that's one way to build up your influence. Now, if white has stones over here, I would actually, if white stones are over here, I would not do this, because that limits the use of my Moyo, and that limits my territory building on this side. So I would not give up the corner to do something like this. I would just take the knight's move instead. This other pincer move is also fine. It's not my favorite, but it's not bad either, I would say, in this case. And then, you can do something like this, right? And this obviously builds up your influence, and this is actually this is Sente now, so you might be able to just take more of your corner or do something like this to build up your moyo and your influence. So these two pincers, like I would play these pincers, but only if I had stones on the corresponding corner to make my moyo and influence. If these were white, I would not make these pincer moves because I just don't have as much potential for territory that way. So once again, like for me, which Joseki I play on the 4-4 corner, which is the one I'm most familiar with, does heavily depend on where my other stone placements are on the board. And that's when I play SDKs or lower SDKs or DDKs, like if I play SDKs like below 6 or 7Q, 5, 6, 7Q, or if I play DDKs, I do recognize that they don't really take consideration of where the other points are on the board. They just choose like a random Joseki to actually play. And that's the wrong way of looking at the game. For Go, you have to look holistically at the entire game. There's a much bigger board than chess, and the outcome of the games are not decided by like a single battle in the middle or something. There can be many battles, many locations, and setting up your shape right can easily like get you a pretty big influence if the other person's not paying attention. So if you really want to improve from SDK and DDK, you do actually have to take, like in your opening game, you definitely have to take into account where your other stones are and where your opponent's stones are, and choose the Joseki you want to play based on that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.